The arena gleamed like a diamond carved from starlight, filled with alien nobles who had traveled across 9 systems to witness the final humiliation of Earth cuisine. They called his food poison, and when the princess saw the pork belly on his cutting board, her disgust echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. But when she took her first bite, she wept in a way her species only cries once in a lifetime. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The Galactic Taste Summit rose from the obsidian plains of Nexus Prime like a crown of frozen lightning. Its walls, translucent and pulsing with bioluminescent veins, stretched toward a sky that held 3 moons and no mercy. Inside, the grand arena curved in tiers of polished crystal, each level crowded with delegates whose bodies defied Earth biology. Scales that shimmered like oil, slicks, skin that breathed colors, eyes that saw in spectrums humans could only imagine. And at the very bottom, on the preparation floor, Owen Blake stood alone. His station was smaller than the others. A single burner, a cutting board scarred by decades of use. No molecular synthesizer, no gravity manipulator. Just fire, metal, and a man's hands. His chef's coat, once white, had yellowed at the collar. His face carried lines earned from sleepless nights and a daughter who still asked when Mommy would come home. Maya sat on a stool beside him, her legs swinging, her small hands weaving wildflowers into a crown nobody would wear. She was 6 years old. Her hair fell in dark waves like her mother's. Her eyes held the same stubborn hope that had kept Owen cooking even when the universe told him to stop. The delegates did not look at them. They looked past them, through them, as if father and daughter were smoke that would dissipate before the real event began. Their voices rose in clicks, hums, and harmonic frequencies that translated through neural implants into a single, unified contempt. Magistrate Kron stood at the highest tier, his exoskeleton black as a beetle's back, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. He wore robes stitched with the sigils of 40 conquered worlds. His voice boomed through the arena like thunder breaking over stone. "Humanity has petitioned for culinary recognition for the last time," said Kron. "Today we end this charade. Today we cleanse the galactic palate of their barbarism." The crowd hissed approval. A Veari noble laughed, bioluminescent patterns flashing across her skin like neon mockery. A Threxian diplomat spat something acidic onto the floor, and it sizzled. Owen did not flinch. He had heard worse in smaller rooms. He reached for the pork belly, its surface pale and lined with fat that would render into something holy if given time. He placed it on the board with reverence, then drew his knife. The sound of the blade, meeting flesh echoed. Gasps rippled through the tiers. "Disgusting," someone hissed. "Primitive," another clicked. "They butcher living tissue," said a third voice, dripping with horror. Maya looked up at her father, her hands stilled on the flowers. Owen met her eyes and smiled, small and sad and certain. "Keep making it beautiful, sweetheart," said Owen. "That's all we can do." She nodded and returned to her work, threading stems through stems, building something no one would see. And far above, in the royal gallery, the doors began to open. The doors split apart like a wound opening in the crystal wall. Silence fell so fast it felt like suffocation. The molten light veins in the ceiling dimmed as if the arena itself bowed. Even Magistrate Kron's mandibles stilled mid-click, his exoskeleton plates shifting nervously. Princess Velira entered. She moved like winter given form, tall and impossibly thin, her body composed of interlocking crystalline segments that refracted light into 1,000 fractured rainbows. Her face, angular and sharp, held eyes like twin moons, silver and depthless. Behind her floated a crown of living ice that never melted, never touched her head, simply orbited in patient devotion. At her side walked Selene, her advisor, whose skin flowed like mercury beneath robes of deep violet. Selene's expression was carved from stone, her forearms folded in a posture that suggested both elegance and threat. And between them, holding Velira's hand, walked a child. Nera was small, her crystalline body still translucent in places where adult segments had not yet formed. Her crown was a single shard of ice, barely larger than a snowflake. She looked around the arena with wide silver eyes, taking in the tiers of delegates, the molecular synthesizers humming on their pedestals, the future written in technology and power. Then her gaze fell to the preparation floor, to Maya, to the wild flowers. Velira's eyes followed her daughter's, and when they landed on Owen's station, her face twisted. The disgust was not subtle. It was profound, the kind of revulsion that reaches into the soul and pulls out ancient fear. "Flesh," said Velira, the word falling from her mouth like a stone into still water. The arena erupted. Delegates leaned forward, hissing, clicking, their bodies radiating approval. Kron descended 3 tiers, his voice rising in triumph. "You see, Your Majesty," said Kron. "This is what we have endured. Humanity insists on preparing dead tissue. They call it cuisine. They burn it over open flame like their cave-dwelling ancestors." Velira descended the steps with Selene and Nera following. Each footfall rang against crystal like a bell tolling. She stopped at the edge of Owen's station, her height casting him in shadow. Owen did not bow. He stood with his knife in hand, the pork belly scored and ready for seasoning. Maya had gone very still on her stool, the flower crown clutched in her small hands. "You cook animal flesh," said Velira, "not a question. An accusation." "Yes, Your Majesty," said Owen. "You burn it." "I render it," said Owen. "With respect." Laughter exploded through the tiers. A Threxian guard doubled over, his spines rattling. The Veyari noble wiped tears from her glowing cheeks. Velira did not laugh. She stared at the pork belly as if it were a weapon aimed at her heart. Her crystalline fingers curled into fists. "This is why Earth will never sit among us," said Velira. "You worship death and call it sustenance." Selene stepped forward, her 4 hands spreading like a lotus opening. "Remove him," said Selene. "Remove the child. Remove this abomination before the princess is further insulted." Guards moved toward the station, their weapons humming to life. Maya's flower crown fell to the floor, and Owen Blake, single father and condemned chef, finally spoke with a voice that did not beg. "Let me prove you wrong." The guards froze mid-stride, their weapons still humming like angry wasps. The arena held its breath. No human had spoken to Princess Velira with anything but trembling deference in 300 cycles. Magistrate Kron's mandibles spread wide in shock that curdled quickly into rage. "You dare address Her Majesty with demands," said Kron. Owen did not lower his gaze. He stood with the knife still in his hand, but his voice remained steady. "Not a demand," said Owen. "A request. Let me cook 1 meal. If it fails to move you, I will accept the ban. Earth cuisine will vanish from every galactic kitchen." Selene's 4 arms crossed in dismissal. Her mercury skin rippled with contempt. "The princess does not bargain with meat cutters," said Selene. But Velira raised 1 crystalline hand, and silence fell. Her silver eyes studied Owen with intensity that felt like being dissected by moonlight. "You believe your flesh cooking can change my mind," said Velira. "I believe it can speak for itself," said Owen. The crowd erupted in jeers. A delegate threw something that shattered against Owen's station. Maya flinched but did not cry. Kron descended to the preparation floor, his exoskeleton gleaming. "Then let us formalize this farce," said Kron. "The human will prepare his barbaric flesh dish under standard competition rules. When it fails every metric of civilized cuisine, the ban becomes permanent." Selene nodded. "Agreed," said Selene. "The princess will taste. The tribunal will judge." Velira's gaze had not left Owen. "One condition," said Velira. The arena stilled. "Your child chooses the final ingredient," said Velira. "Whatever she selects, You must incorporate it. No substitutions. Laughter burst from the tears. A 6-year-old child selecting an ingredient for a meal that would determine the fate of Earth cuisine. Kron's mandibles clicked in approval. Brilliant, said Kron. Let the child condemn her own species. Owen looked at Maya. She sat small on the stool, the fallen flower crown at her feet, her eyes wide and frightened. He saw his wife in her face. He saw every Sunday dinner they had cooked together before the sickness came. He knelt before his daughter and took her small hands. Do you trust me, sweetheart? Said Owen. Maya nodded. Then choose with your heart, said Owen. Choose what Mommy would have chosen. He kissed her forehead and stood, turned to face Velira. We accept your terms, said Owen. The guards stepped back. The tribunal's recording drones hummed to life. Delegates leaned forward in anticipation of failure. Kron's mandibles clicked in rhythm with his certainty. High in the royal gallery, young Nira tugged on her mother's hand. Mother, said Nira, I hope he wins. Velira did not answer, but her grip on her daughter's hand tightened. The challenge had been set. Owen returned to his station and began to gather his tools. Salt, pepper, fire. The simple instruments of transformation that had fed humanity since the first flame was coaxed from stone. Maya slid from her stool and walked to the canvas bag her mother had sewn. Inside were the ingredients they had brought from Earth, spices, herbs, things grown in dirt. She reached inside with small hands. The entire arena watched. Nobles leaned forward. Recording drones zoomed closer, capturing what they believed would be Earth's final humiliation. Maya's fingers closed around something. She lifted it slowly. A jar of amber liquid that caught the arena's light. Raw honey. The galaxy began to laugh. Owen returned to his station with the weight of 9 systems pressing on his shoulders. The pork belly lay before him, pale and honest, its surface scored in a crosshatch pattern that would open like flowers under heat. He had butchered it himself 3 days prior, following the method his father taught him, the one passed down through 5 generations of men who believed meat was not murder but transformation. The arena watched with the patience of vultures. Delegates leaned forward in their crystal seats, recording devices, floating around Owen's station like mechanical flies. Every cut would be analyzed, every temperature measured, every molecule catalogued and judged against the sterile perfection of synthesized nutrition. Magistrate Kron had descended to a viewing platform that jutted over the preparation floor like a gallows. His mandibles clicked in anticipation. Begin, said Kron. Let us witness this primitive ritual one final time. Owen did not acknowledge him. He reached for his salt, hand harvested from Earth's dying oceans, and began to season the pork belly with motions worn smooth by 10,000 repetitions. His hands moved with a custodian's reverence, each gesture deliberate, each touch a small prayer. He did not rush. His wife had taught him that the first lesson of cooking was patience, that heat and time were partners in a dance older than language. Maya slipped from her stool and gathered the fallen wildflowers. She arranged them in a circle at the edge of Owen's station, there, purple and yellow petals bright against the cold crystal floor. The delegates pointed and laughed. A child playing with weeds while her father prepared his humiliation. But Nira watched from beside her mother's throne with silver eyes that held no mockery. She tugged Velira's hand. Mother, said Nira, may I go closer? I want to see the flowers. Velira's crystalline features hardened, but she nodded once. Sharp, reluctant. Do not touch anything, said Velira. Do not speak to them. Nira descended the steps and stopped at the edge of Maya's flower circle. She knelt, her single ice shard crown catching the light. The 2 children studied each other in silence, one human, one alien, one condemned, one crowned. Maya held out a yellow wildflower, its petals soft as whispered secrets. Nira reached for it with crystalline fingers and held it with impossible gentleness. It is beautiful, said Nira. My mom planted them, said Maya, before she went away. Where did she go? Said Nira. Heaven, said Maya. Daddy says she watches from there. Nira looked up at the ceiling, searching for a face in the pulsing light. "My father is gone too," said Nira. "He went somewhere mother will not name." The two children sat together, weaving flowers. Maya began to hum, soft and uncertain, a melody her mother used to sing during Sunday dinners. The tune wandered through the arena like a ghost. Owen worked in steady rhythm. He heated his pan until it whispered, then laid the pork belly down with ceremony. The sizzle rose like applause from an audience of one. Fat began to render, pooling golden and pure, the aroma curling upward in visible ribbons. The delegates shifted uncomfortably. The smell was not synthesized, it was not clean, it carried the weight of something real, something that made their certainty waver like candle flame in wind. Selene's forearms uncrossed slowly, and Velira, for the first time, leaned forward. The pork belly crackled in the pan, its surface darkening to mahogany, fat rendering into liquid gold that pooled at the edges. Owen worked with the concentration of a surgeon, turning the meat at precise intervals, watching for the moment when crust became carbon, when perfection tipped into ruin. The arena had grown quieter, not silent, but the jeers had softened to murmurs, the laughter to uncertain whispers. The smell was doing something no one had anticipated. It was reaching into the sterile air and pulling out something ancient. Even species that had never eaten flesh found themselves leaning forward. Magistrate Kron's mandibles clicked nervously. He descended another tier, his exoskeleton plates shifting. "Enough theater," said Kron. "The child must choose the ingredient now, before the meat burns, and this farce ends in ash." Owen lifted his gaze to Maya. She sat beside Nira now, the two children surrounded by a circle of woven wildflowers. Maya's face was serious, her dark eyes holding a weight no 6-year-old should carry. She stood slowly and walked to a small canvas bag beneath Owen's station, the bag her mother had sewn, the bag that traveled with them to every kitchen, every station, every last attempt to prove Earth belonged among the stars. From it, Maya withdrew a glass jar. The arena erupted in laughter so sharp it could have drawn blood. Inside the jar, thick and amber, was honey, raw, unprocessed, flecked with bits of wax and pollen, cloudy in the way only real things are cloudy. "Sweetness," shrieked a Veari delegate. "The child drowns failure in sugar." "Primitive," hissed a Threxian guard. "Earth insects," said another voice. "She brings us the vomit of earth insects." Kron's laughter boomed across the crystal tiers. "Perfect," said Kron. "The human will ruin his meat with bee excrement." But Selene had gone very still. Her forearms hung at her sides, her mercury skin rippling. She stared at the honey jar as if seeing a ghost. Velira's silver eyes narrowed. Owen took the jar from Maya's trembling hands. He unscrewed the lid slowly, and the scent of wildflowers and summer rose from its depths. He dipped a spoon into the honey, watching it fall in slow, golden ribbons. "Thank you, sweetheart," said Owen. He turned to the pork belly, now perfectly caramelized, its surface cracked like volcanic glass. With the precision of prayer, he began to glaze it. The honey met the hot fat and transformed. It darkened, thickened, became something more than the sum of its parts. The aroma shifted, deepened, became a symphony, where before it had been a single note. Gasps rippled through the arena. Even the mockers fell silent, because the smell was not just food anymore. It was a door opening to a memory the galaxy had forgotten. It was childhood. It was home. It was the feeling of being loved by someone who would never let you go hungry. Nira stood, her small crystalline hand reaching toward the scent as if it were a physical thing she could touch. "Mother," said Nira. "It smells like father's jacket." Velira's face cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. The honey glaze darkened on the pork belly, caramelizing into a lacquer that caught the arena's light like stained glass. Owen worked in silence, basting with the patience of a man who understood that some things could not be rushed. Each pass of the spoon added another layer, another dimension. building complexity the way sediment builds mountains over millennia. The aroma thickened in the air. It moved through the arena not as smell but as presence, as memory made tangible. It carried notes of smoke and sweetness, of fat rendered clean, of flowers that had died to feed bees that had labored to make gold. It carried time itself. The delegates shifted in their seats. A Threxian diplomat touched his throat as if choking. A Veyari noble's bioluminescent patterns flickered and dimmed. A Palarin senator closed all 6 of her eyes and breathed deeply, her face twisting with something that looked like pain. "What is this?" whispered someone in the upper tiers. "Molecular manipulation," said another voice, uncertain now. "It is a trick," said a third. But the words carried no conviction. Magistrate Kron gripped the railing of his platform, his mandibles working frantically. He had expected failure, had built his career on the weakness of humanity, on their primitive methods and inferior ingredients. But the smell climbing toward him was not weakness. It was a language his body remembered, but his mind had forgotten. "Analysis," barked Kron. "Run a full molecular analysis." The recording drones swooped closer, their sensors scanning, their processors calculating. Data streamed across holographic displays. Chemical compounds, amino acid chains, Maillard reactions cascading through proteins and sugars in patterns that should not have been possible with such crude equipment. But the numbers meant nothing, because what filled the arena could not be reduced to data. Selene descended from the royal platform, her forearms trembling. Her mercury skin had gone pale, almost translucent. She stopped 10 paces from Owen's station and simply breathed, her eyes closed, her face tilted upward as if receiving a benediction. "This is not synthesized," said Selene, her voice barely audible. "No," said Owen, not looking up from his work. "This required patience. Yes, this required love." Owen's hands stilled for a moment. Just a moment. Then continued their careful work. "Yes," said Owen. Velira had risen from her throne. The living ice crown orbiting her head pulsed with light that seemed suddenly fragile. She descended the steps slowly, Nira clutching her hand, both of them drawn by something stronger than curiosity. The princess stopped at the edge of the preparation floor. Her crystalline face held no expression, but her silver eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "What have you done?" said Velira. Owen lifted the pork belly from the pan. The glaze had set into a perfect shell, cracking slightly at the edges where fat had bubbled through. He placed it on a cutting board worn smooth by his father's hands, his grandfather's hands, generations of men who believed feeding someone was the highest form of respect. "I made dinner," said Owen. He reached for his knife. The blade caught the light, and when he pressed it to the pork belly, the crust shattered like sugar glass, revealing meat so tender it barely needed cutting. Steam rose, carrying the final notes of the symphony, and in that steam, something moved, not physically, but deeper. The arena held its breath, and Princess Velira began to shake. Owen plated the pork belly with the care of a jeweler setting diamonds. He arranged 3 slices on a simple white plate, their edges glistening with honey glaze that had cooled to the texture of amber. Beside them, he placed a single wildflower from Maya's arrangement, its yellow petals bright against the porcelain. The presentation was not elaborate, no molecular foam, no gravity-defied architecture, just meat and honey and a flower that had grown in dirt. The recording drones circled the plate, their lenses focusing, their sensors cataloging every detail for the tribunal's judgment. Magistrate Kron leaned so far over his platform railing that his exoskeleton creaked. "Present it," said Kron, his voice tight as wire. Owen lifted the plate and walked toward Princess Velira. Each step echoed against the crystal floor. The delegates watched in absolute silence, their bodies tense, their certainty eroding like sand beneath tide. Velira stood rigid as a statue carved from winter itself, her silver eyes fixed on the plate, as if it held a weapon aimed at her heart. Her crystalline fingers curled into fists. The living ice crown above her head pulsed erratically, faster than it should, as if her body was betraying something her mind refused to acknowledge. Selene stepped forward, positioning herself between Owen and the princess. "This is unnecessary," said Selene. "The smell alone proves nothing. Synthesizers can replicate aroma." "Not this one," said a voice from the upper tiers. A small voice. Scholarly. It belonged to a Vaindari archivist whose skin was the color of old parchment. "I have studied Earth food history for 40 cycles. This scent signature matches nothing in our databases. It is emergent. It is real." Murmurs spread through the arena like ripples in still water. Kron slammed a claw against his platform. "The princess will taste and confirm what we all know. That human flesh cooking is barbarism dressed in theater." Velira moved Selene aside with a gentle touch of her crystalline hand. She stepped forward until she stood directly before Owen, tall enough that he had to lift the plate higher. "You believe this will change my mind," said Velira. "I believe it will speak for itself," said Owen. "I have tasted food from 70 systems," said Velira. "I have judged cuisine from species that have cooked for 10,000 years. What makes you think your primitive methods can compete?" Owen met her silver gaze without flinching. "Because I cooked it for my daughter," said Owen. "And that is a language older than any empire." Velira's breath caught. Something moved behind her eyes, a shadow of recognition that she crushed immediately beneath the weight of her disgust. She reached for the plate with crystalline fingers that trembled so slightly only Nira noticed. She lifted a slice of pork belly. The glaze stretched between meat and plate like threads of spun gold before breaking. She brought it close to her face, and for a moment, just a moment, her features softened. Then she placed it in her mouth. The arena went silent as death. Velira's eyes closed. Her body went rigid. And then, slowly, impossible tears began streaming down her crystalline face, cutting channels of light through features that had not wept in 300 cycles. Because her species only cried once in a lifetime, when they remembered what they had lost. The tears fell like shattered stars, each one leaving a trail of luminescence down Velira's crystalline face. They pooled at her jawline before dropping to the floor, where they froze instantly into tiny diamonds of salt and sorrow. The arena watched in horrified fascination as their princess, who had not wept since her coronation 3 centuries prior, came undone before a plate of honey-glazed pork. Nira rushed forward, her small hands reaching for her mother's robes. "Mother," said Nira, her voice breaking. "Mother, what is wrong?" But Velira could not answer. She stood frozen, the piece of pork belly dissolving on her tongue, releasing flavors that bypassed taste and struck directly at something deeper. Memory. Loss. A door opening to a room she had locked and forgotten. Selene's forearms moved to support the princess, but Velira waved her away. She took another slice with shaking fingers, brought it to her mouth. The tears flowed faster. The delegates erupted in chaos. Some shouted accusations of poison. Others demanded medical intervention. Magistrate Kron descended to the preparation floor, his mandibles clicking in fury. "What have you done to her?" said Kron. "What toxin have you hidden in your barbaric meat?" Owen stood motionless, the empty plate in his hands, watching a queen remember something that hurt more than any wound. Velira swallowed, opened her silver eyes. When she spoke, her voice was raw as an open nerve. "My father," said Velira. The arena stilled. "He traveled to Earth 40 cycles before I took the throne," said Velira. "It was forbidden. Earth was quarantined then, deemed too violent for diplomatic contact. But he went anyway, in secret, driven by a curiosity I called foolishness." She touched her face where the tears had carved their channels. "He returned, changed," said Velira. "He spoke of a small restaurant in a city called Portland, of a family who fed him despite his appearance. Despite having nothing themselves, they shared a meal with him. This meal." She gestured to the empty plate with a crystalline hand that would not stop trembling. "Pork belly glazed with honey and patience," said Velira. He described it 1,000 times. The way the fat melted, the way the sweetness balanced salt, the way it tasted like someone had cooked love itself and served it on a plate. Selene's mercury skin had gone completely transparent. Her eyes widened with understanding. "The Blake family," said Selene, her voice barely a whisper. Owen's breath caught. His hands tightened on the plate. "You knew my parents," said Owen. Velira nodded slowly, tears still falling, each one a small eternity of grief. "Your father taught mine that cuisine was not about molecular perfection," said Velira. "It was about feeding someone you loved with everything you had. My father came home and tried to teach our chefs this principle. They laughed at him, called him contaminated by human sentiment." She looked at Nira, at the small, crystalline child who had never known her grandfather. "He died trying to convince the Empire that we had forgotten something essential," said Velira. "He died believing Earth held wisdom we needed." Kron stepped back, his certainty crumbling like sand. "This proves nothing," said Kron, but his voice had lost its thunder. Velira turned to him with eyes that could have melted steel. "This proves everything." Selene moved with the grace of water flowing uphill. Her forearms reached into the folds of her violet robes and withdrew something small, something she had carried for 40 cycles in silence. A photograph, faded, creased, printed on earth paper that had yellowed with time. She held it toward the light, and the arena's projection systems magnified it across every screen, every holographic display, until a moment frozen in time filled the crystal chamber. The image showed a small restaurant, wood tables, checkered curtains, the kind of place that served comfort before cuisine. At the center table sat 4 figures. A tall, crystalline alien, his features softer than Velira's, his eyes bright with something that looked like joy. Beside him, a young human couple. The man had Owen's jawline, his careful hands. The woman had Maya's dark hair, her gentle smile. And on the table between them, on a chipped white plate, sat pork belly glazed with honey, its surface catching the camera's flash like amber. Wildflowers stood in a mason jar beside it, the same yellow petals Maya had woven into crowns. Velira's legs gave out. She knelt on the crystal floor, her living ice crown dimming to almost nothing. Her crystalline fingers reached toward the projection as if she could touch her father's face one more time. "He kept this hidden," said Selene, her voice breaking. "Your father. He showed it to me the night before he died and made me promise to keep it safe, to wait for the right moment." "Why?" said Velira. "Why hide this from me?" "Because you were young," said Selene. "Because the Empire was fracturing. Because admitting he loved humans more than politics would have cost you the throne. He chose your crown over his truth." Owen stepped forward slowly. He knelt beside Velira, close enough that their different biologies shared the same air. "My father told me a story before he died," said Owen, "about the day an alien walked into his restaurant, how everyone else ran, how my mother set a table anyway and said that fear was no excuse for rudeness." He touched the projection with one finger, tracing the outline of his parents' faces. He said, "The alien wept when he tasted the pork belly," said Owen. "Said his species had forgotten how to cry, that the meal reminded him what tears were for." Velira's silver eyes met Owen's brown ones. "Your father gave mine a gift I am only now understanding," said Velira. "He fed him without asking for anything in return. No treaty, no trade, just a meal shared between strangers who chose to become family for one evening." She stood slowly, her crystalline body reassembling its regal posture. But something had changed. The coldness had cracked. Warmth bled through the fissures. "Magistrate Kron," said Velira, her voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of rule. Kron stood frozen on his platform, his mandibles slack, his arrogance evaporated like morning frost. "The ban is lifted," said Velira. The arena erupted, but Velira was not finished. "Effective immediately, Earth cuisine will become the foundation of a new galactic culinary academy," said Velira. And I will be its first student." She turned to Owen, this queen who had forgotten how to be her father's daughter. "Teach me," said Velira. "Teach me what I spent 300 cycles trying to destroy." The changes came quietly at first, like dawn creeping across a sleeping world. The Galactic Taste Summit adjourned not with a bang but with 1,000 small gestures of transformation. Delegates who had mocked now asked questions. Species that had sneered now took notes. The arena that had been built to witness Earth's humiliation became the birthplace of something the galaxy had not seen in 10,000 cycles. Humility. Magistrate Kron was not executed. Velira refused that mercy. Instead, she assigned him to the Academy's kitchens as a student alongside her, stripping him of title and armor, clothing him in the same simple apron Owen wore. He would learn to feed others before he could judge them. The Academy rose on the plains of Nexus Prime within 40 cycles. Its architecture blended crystal and wood, synthesis and fire, alien precision, and human imperfection. Kitchens stretched like fingers reaching toward every species, every method, every tradition that had been dismissed as primitive. Princess Velira enrolled as promised. She stood at a cutting board beside Kron, beside delegates who had once bowed to her, all of them equal in their ignorance. Owen taught, the first lesson with Maya at his side, Nira beside her, the two children translating their father's legacies into a language the galaxy could finally hear. "Cooking is not domination," said Owen. "It is transformation. You do not conquer an ingredient. You honor it. You do not force flavor. You coax it with patience and time." He demonstrated with another pork belly, his hands moving through motions worn smooth by generations. The students watched in silence. Some took notes. Others simply observed, learning that wisdom could live in calloused hands and yellowed aprons. Velira struggled at first. Her crystalline fingers were not made for the delicate work of seasoning, but she persisted with the stubbornness her father had possessed, the trait she had inherited and weaponized against his memory. Slowly, she learned. On the 100th day of the Academy's operation, Velira completed her first dish without Owen's guidance. Pork belly glazed with honey, the crust perfect, the fat rendered clean, the sweetness balanced against salt. She wept again. Smaller tears this time, private ones that she did not hide. Maya and Nira had become inseparable. They studied together, played together, translated the gap between species with the ease of children who had never learned to see difference as distance. They planted wildflowers in the Academy's gardens, yellow and purple blooms that would feed the bees Owen had brought from Earth. The honey those bees made became the Academy's signature ingredient, bottled and shared across 9 systems, each jar carrying a label that read, "In memory of those who fed strangers and called them family." Trade routes shifted. Cultural exchanges multiplied. Species that had warred for millennia sat at tables together and discovered that sharing a meal dissolved barriers no treaty could touch. Owen never sought fame. He taught his classes, raised his daughter, and sometimes stood in the Academy's gardens at twilight. He thought of his wife, of his parents, of the unbroken chain of people who believed feeding others was the highest form of love. And, on clear nights, when 3 moons hung in Nexus Prime's sky, Velira would find him there. They would stand in comfortable silence until one of them spoke. "Your father would be proud," said Owen. "So would yours," said Velira. The galaxy did not become perfect, but it became truer. And in kitchens scattered across impossible distances, people learned that the simplest act could shift the universe itself.